Good evening. My name is Bob Hauser. I'm the Executive Officer of the American Philosophical Society, and I welcome you to this jointly sponsored concert of the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society and the American Philosophical Society's November 2020 meeting. Because this is a unique event, and some of you may not be familiar with the society, I'm going to say more about it. That is to say, the American Philosophical Society. I'm going to say more about it than would otherwise be the case at a typical concert of the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. The American Philosophical Society acknowledges with respect that it resides in Lenapehoking, the homeland of the Lenape people, whose historical relationships with this land, now called Philadelphia, continue to this day. We recognize their continued presence and their perseverance despite centuries of land theft, removal, persecution of their language, culture, and traditions. The society honors the Lenape community and those of other native peoples through our collections, fellowships, research awards, and outreach. We also express our sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous indigenous communities and individuals who have offered their guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaboration. For those joining us for the first time, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin, familiar name around here, and his picture is just above me, in 1743 for promoting useful knowledge. Most of our nation's founders were members, and its third president was for 17 years Thomas Jefferson, during most of which time he was either vice president or President of the United States. Like the Constitution, the presidency, the Congress, and the courts, as a source and keeper of knowledge, the society was an essential piece of the bedrock on which our nation was founded, and it remains so today. We at the society continue to admire Franklin, Jefferson, and Washington, whose portraits all appear behind me here, for their contributions to the founding of our nation, to the functions of this society, and to their other contributions to science, education, and other noble causes. We are also much aware of their faults, as in the case of the three gentlemen behind me, their slaveholding. We at the APS are committed to sustaining the better parts of their legacies while working toward a future of inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, what we call the APS IDEA, IDEA. The society is a catalyst for the discovery of new knowledge. Election to membership honors those who have made exceptionally significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and public life. The society promotes useful knowledge, its original and continuing mission, by providing over $1.5 million a year in grants and fellowships to younger scholars, those who need it the most. Our library and museum collections, some 14 million manuscripts, close to 300,000 books, and thousands of artifacts, along with our research centers, serve scholars and visitors from all over the globe. The society sustains and informs citizenry. We do that through our meetings, influencing the influencers, as well as through publications, public lectures, and research support. Although our facilities remain physically closed to all except staff and fellows because of the pandemic, we remain committed to serving our mission of promoting useful knowledge. Please check the events list on the APS website, www.apsfil.org, amphilsoch.org, for our traditional offerings and for news of forthcoming visual events. It is now my pleasure to leave the stage to our good friend Miles Cohen, who will introduce tonight's marvelous performer, Jeremy Denk. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Let's see here. Stand in the right spot. Welcome to the Philadelphia Chamber Music Society. On behalf of our founding artistic director, Tony Cecchia, and our executive director, Philip Manival, my name is Miles. I'm the artistic director. It is a pleasure for us to have you here in the hall and online. To all of you joining us as part of the American Philosophical Society fall meetings, we say welcome. We're also thrilled to have with us Jeremy Denk, one of our very favorites who joins us every season. We'll turn things over to Jeremy in just a few minutes. Before then, I'm going to be as brief as I can so that we can get to the music, but bear with me. If you're watching online, we have 3 platforms that you could be watching through. That is our website, our Facebook page, and YouTube. And on all those platforms, we have live chat functions. Should you have any technical difficulties during the performance and you wish to have them resolved, we have 3 staff members, Michelle Shirk, Brian Potter, and Marina Weber. They're all working the back ends of those platforms, and they'll be there to help you if in fact there are any difficulties, but we hope there are not. Also, if you're enjoying the performance tonight and you wish to see it again, if you're watching online or here in the audience, or you wish to tell a friend, that would be nice. We will ask Jeremy right after the concert to give us the okay and provide, and assuming he does, we will then rebroadcast the performance for the next 72 hours. If Jeremy would like to watch it tonight just to make sure of anything, that it all goes smoothly on his end, then tomorrow morning we will then put it up at 10 a.m. and whatever he okays, that's what we'll run for then 72 hours. The last thing to note, if you're watching online tonight, you will probably say, oh, Miles and Bob are not wearing their masks, but this is the only part, that is the stage of the Philosophical Society, that is a mask optional zone. Everywhere else in the Philosophical Society, or in Benjamin Franklin Hall, excuse me, is masks are absolutely a necessity. They must be worn at all times, and they must be worn properly, which I'm reminded to tell you covers your nose and your mouth. And given that today's main speaker at the American Philosophical Society meetings was Dr. Fauci, I'm pretty sure that he would agree with the reminder of how to wear your masks. Everywhere else in the hall, a mask is a necessity. We also have created a 30-foot gap between the stage and our audience. We've done this for the musicians who we would like to give the option. Some of them are feeling comfortable enough to not wear a mask, and others prefer to wear a mask, but we wanted to give them that option, and that's why we've done that. A couple other things to talk about, mostly around support. Many of you that are tuning in tonight from the Philosophical Society membership, and maybe even from the Chamber Music Society side, this may be your first time with us this season, and you may be wondering how in the world are we able to pull these concerts off in the midst of everything that's going on. And it takes a lot of vision and a lot of dedication from the Chamber Music Society staff, in particular our board, and in particular our top leadership, including Philip Manival, our executive director. And we have to say a big thank you to them, but we also have to acknowledge that what we're doing here took a lot of effort and a lot of careful planning that was in coordination with all the protocols of the city and all the protocols that we have here at the Philosophical Society as well. Nothing happens in a vacuum, though. And though you're watching online and it is a pay what you wish model, if you're watching on our website, you will see that below the video portion, there is a donation section. And I would call your attention to the categories, specifically the category of $25, because if you were watching in the hall tonight, that is what it would cost you, $25. So if you feel so motivated, we would appreciate a donation to support these events this fall, and so that we may continue to have live stream events come to you on a pay what you wish model into the 2021 portion of our season. The other thing just to remind you is that as you watch tonight, you may be thinking to yourself, well, maybe the hall is being donated, or maybe the piano has been donated, maybe the artists are performing for free. Well, that's not the case. Throughout the fall, we have paid the American Philosophical Society its full rent, and we have paid all of our artists their full fee, and we are paying all of our staff their full salary. And we're doing that through a lot of tireless work from our board and Philip and myself, but also because of your donations. So I ask you again, please, if you feel so motivated, to give. Now, a few people to highlight who have been above and beyond in their giving. The first is that tonight's recital marks the first event of the Elaine Kligerman Piano Recital Series. And if you don't know Elaine, I'm hopeful that when we get back to a time when we all have our events in person again, that you will get to know Elaine. She has been a dedicated and loyal PCMS ticket buyer, subscriber, supporter for at least 3 decades, and a lover of all things relating to the piano. She's also a wonderful pianist. So it was her rather historic gift to us right before COVID that has now named the Piano Recital Series the Elaine Kligerman Piano Recital Series. We say thank you to Elaine, and we'll say that a few more times this month and throughout the season. We also want to thank Drs. Susan Giesecke-Bloom and Dr. A. Charles Winkleman for their support of our live stream. We also want to thank Bob Hauser, who spoke already, and Annie Westcott, Director of Meetings here at the Philosophical Society, for their constant support of our concerts here at Ben Franklin Hall. We would not be able to do it without them and Jeremy Schernrock and his staff here. We say a huge thank you to them. And the last thank you goes to our audio and video team tonight, which is Noriko Okabe on audio and Matt Genders on video. We are super, super thankful for their hard work, and they're led by my colleague, Eric Petersons, who's been all things live stream since the very beginning. For everyone in the hall, let's remember, I've taken the time to silence my phone. Please join me and make sure your cell phones are silenced or muted so there are no interruptions. Don't forget, after the performance, Jeremy and I will sit down for a Q&A for about 15 minutes. That'll take place within 5 minutes after the conclusion of the recital. But for now, please help me welcome to the stage our dear friend, Jeremy Denk.
I don't want to speak long, as there's been speaking already, but this is the first time I've played in front of people who weren't operating a camera since March. And it's utterly overwhelming in a way. And thank you all for being here. This program, in case it wasn't obvious, maybe it is to all of you already, is a love triangle program. And it's more or less, without the MISSY MAZZOLI, more or less chronological, in that it starts in 1830 when 20-year-old Schumann meets whatever 12-year-old CLARA, whatever, in his piano teacher's house, as I'm sure you know. And then it goes to 1853, about 22 years later, well into their marriage and well into Schumann's illness, and around the time, of course, when they met Brahms. And then the last piece on the program takes us to the end of the story, and Brahms and CLARA, I believe, was still alive. They died within a very short time of each other, actually. And you have this sense of looking back on this great trinity of music, of classical music. Papillon is a really fun piece to talk about. I'll try to keep it brief, but it's based on a novel by Jean-Paul called Flegeljahre. And in particular, the last scene, which is a ball, a masked ball, in which I always forget their names. Walt and Wult attempt to win the love of Wina, who's Polish, and hence occasionally you hear some polonaises in this piece because she appears and she's extremely Polish. And this piece is sort of quintessential early Schumann, little fragments of things, hence the name Papillon, butterflies, little flitting bits of music. And each of them is a little fragment of dance filled with this kind of incredible yearning and nostalgia, sometimes just wit and charm, but then also laced with this deep feeling. And you know, Schumann went unsuccessfully off to law school in Jena, and he sent back to his mother for some reading material, and the thing he really wanted was Schubert waltzes. And Schubert wrote hundreds of these waltzes, and many of them have this kind of beautiful ambivalence about them. And maybe nothing has more of that beautiful nostalgia in it than the end of Papillon. You have the famous grandfather's dance, which always meant the end of the ball, right? And then you hear the first waltz kind of overlaid on top of it, the end and the beginning kind of wandering in and out of each other's memory. And gradually fading. You hear the dance fading into the night, and this magical ending with the arpeggio that vanishes one note at a time. So a wonderful piece. Schumann was only, I hate to say it, 20 years old, I think, when he wrote it, something like that, maybe 19, filled with his greatest inspiration. microphone again. Is it working? Yes. As I said, somewhat fast forward in time, Schumann, after some difficulties, of course, he married CLARA against Clara's father's wishes. And that, of course, generated an incredible array of amazing piano pieces that we're grateful for. And then, of course, they entered upon a married life, had children, and Schumann's, obviously already somewhat unstable personality took a turn for the worse. And by 1853, when she penned the set of romances, he was definitely in the depressive period. He came in and out of sort of manic creation and Great Depression. So she wrote, I guess I just learned this from your program note tonight. She wrote the second two of these romances in 1853, before, I think in June 1853, before they met Brahms. September 1853, Brahms arrives, the young Brahms, very handsome in those days. Not that he wasn't always handsome, but more classically handsome in those days. And they became incredibly close, and he became a part of the family, as you may know. And then that next January, Robert Schumann, threw himself in the Rhine and was rescued and was sent to the sanatorium. And then comes this tremendous, unbelievable period where they won't allow Clara to go to the sanatorium to see her husband, Robert, because they think that will be untherapeutic. So Brahms becomes the go-between between Clara and Robert. He becomes the messenger, going back and forth from the house to the sanatorium. And then, meanwhile, of course, he's also at least a little bit in love with Clara himself. It's an unbelievable emotional moment for all of them. It's hard for me to really imagine, especially for 20-year-old Brahms or whatever age he was. I think more or less the same age Schumann was when he wrote Papillon. Anyway, all this is going on, and it goes on for some number of years, as you may know. And then about a year and a half in, when Brahms had gone off to the sanatorium, she began writing the first of this set. And I think you'll see why. For me, there's some unmistakable signs of Robert written into the piece, and then some unmistakable kind of nobility of Clara, her incredible majesty of phrase, her love of the big grand harmonies unfolding on the piano. But maybe especially in the middle section, she brings in visitors from Robert's music, a kind of palpitating, romantic idea in the middle voice, lots of what we call secondary dominance, chords that want to resolve to other chords that also want to resolve, these kind of incredibly meta harmonies that are just filled with yearning. And then the first piece begins tragically as it began. So 3 pieces, the first one from a later, even darker period, the second two, the second is a very charming little scherzo, incredibly sweet, incredibly brief. And then the last piece, a agitated waltz with a kind of cryptic and mysterious middle section. And then it returns. A little bit of Chopin-esque waltz, keeps looping in and out of itself. And then, of course, at the end, it simply vanishes. this obviously Missy Mazzoli does not belong on the timeline of this program particularly, although I would argue she belongs here because, first of all, the piece is in homage to Brahms. In the program note, you can read that she was aiming to reproduce some of the passion of crossing your hands and playing Brahms piano pieces when she was a kid. And she certainly, you'll see, crosses your hands. It's unbelievable. And then she's also doing something that connects Brahms and Schumann and Clara Schumann, which is, there's this, maybe you already know, this motive called Frei aber einsam, free but lonely, which was sort of a motto. And there's a sonata that you may have heard, the FAE sonata, in which three composers each. Schumann wrote 2 movements, and Brahms wrote a movement, and Dietrich wrote a movement, that's right. And it was all based on these 3 notes. I wish I had from memory right now, because you can stack them all kinds of ways, right? Or, you can do, it depends on how you order them, the way the yearning, and the way, of course, the way that you harmonize them. And Schumann's slow movement on this motive, FAE, is one of the most heartbreaking things you'll ever hear in your life. And it's all, but the way he does the bass line underneath. Anyway, Missy says that eventually this motive appears, and that's an understatement. It's everywhere through this piece, and marvelously so. Even very close to the beginning, after I do my first wild passages, you hear in the right hand, a melody begin to emerge in all kinds of permutations of these 3 notes going back and forth. And similarly, the way she constantly reharmonizes them and rehears them. And often there are 3 harmonies too. Like at the end, there's 3 harmonies. There's B flat major, there's F major, there's A major. And they cycle together like the 3 notes of the FAE in this magnificent and kind of ecstatic ending. There's a propulsive rhythm that generates a lot of the piece, and then it switches modes from obviously wild and incredibly extroverted to the most introverted, kind of meditative. And I think this is switching back. She told me to play it more schizophrenically. So if it seems schizophrenic, then you can blame her. And I think it's also, as I would say, hauntingly beautiful. I think what I'd like to do then, instead of talking anymore, is go directly into the Brahms 4 pieces. Because I think the ending of the Missy Mazzoli into the beginning of the Brahms is rather beautiful. And I hope you'll think so too. And Brahms also likes to wander around a few similar notes. And as you'll hear in the second, for example, of the Brahms pieces, or one of my favorite pieces of all time, the beginning piece of Opus 119, which seems to start out as if Brahms is acknowledging the end of his style and language, because you have these harmonies that are in a way breaking the rules of everything that Brahms did before. You feel like harmony is almost dissolving, but then the waltz emerges. Anyway, I'll stop blathering, and so I'll play Missy Mazzoli, FAE. The piece is actually called Bolts of Loving Thunder, which I assume refers to the wild leaps all over the keyboard, and then Brahms, Opus 119.
everyone. Thank you all for sticking around. If you are not aware at this point, and you should be, tonight's event is obviously done in tandem with the American Philosophical Society. And a few weeks ago, Annie Westcott said that some of the members of the Philosophical Society had some questions for Jeremy, and would he be willing to answer a few of them afterwards? And I asked Jeremy, and he graciously said yes. So the people that make up the Philosophical Society are really some of the most elite and kind of brilliant thinkers really in the world. They range from philosophers and scientists and physicians to musicians and artists and all in between. And the questions that we have tonight really range the gamut from two musicologists to a well-known actor and author and a Philadelphia-based highly acclaimed composer. And then I also have a bonus question for Jeremy as well. Can't leave that out. But we'll jump right in. First, we'll say bravo to Jeremy. That was a beautiful recital. The first question comes from the preeminent Beethoven scholar, Lewis Lockwood. Many of you may know that name, Dr. Lockwood from Harvard. He asked a question about Beethoven. And of course, we didn't hear any Beethoven, so at first I was a little bit confused, but then I thought, boy, this question is so fantastic. And Jeremy has actually played quite a bit of Beethoven for us throughout his performing career with the Chamber Music Society. So some of this will tie into that. I will read the question to everyone. The great English critic Donald Francis Tovey wrote of Beethoven's Waldstein Sonata that this work, quote, Beethoven crossed the Rubicon, end quote. He means that now, instead of writing highly original works that can be heard as challenging his great forerunners Haydn and Mozart, Beethoven has moved into a new expressive sphere that is entirely his own. Jeremy, asks Dr. Lockwood, do you agree with this observation? And if you do, is it reflected in the way you perform Beethoven's piano sonatas?
No, I think a lot of us are asking ourselves right now, like, why are we doing the things that we're doing? I think the pandemic has forced us to. Certainly that's what it's forced a lot of musicians to do. And for me, you know, there's the convenient division of Beethoven's life into like early, middle, and late, right? And there's all the whole like categorization. But there's also, as Dr. Lockwood suggests, there's a human story there. And part of it is that you don't want to keep doing the things that you already did. And you know, we always talk about how Beethoven, like romantic composers couldn't deal with Beethoven. He was too much of a father figure. How could you write anything after Beethoven? And Schumann and Brahms had a problem. I think Beethoven also had that problem. You know, after he wrote the middle period pieces, which were so incredible, right? It's like, what am I going to do next? You know, and like any composer would, you know, once you've achieved something so incredible, what's going to happen? And for me, one of the great and most, you know, I try to talk about how one of the purposes of music is this kind of empathy, I guess, right? Like a human connection. And one of the things that happens in the late Beethoven pieces is he starts questioning the very system that allowed him to write all the masterpieces, you know, that he did. And he starts to isolate certain parts of life, like parts of musical life. Like there's a famous passage in Charles Rosen about how Beethoven goes, you know, he starts to think about the trill, you know, the cadential trill, which comes right before the end of, you know, any piece. Any Mozart cadenza ends. But then, you know, in 111, Beethoven starts. He's still on this trill, but we're now about to go to the other universe, right? We're about to. So the most common elements of the musical language become so important for him. And he tries to rehear them, rethink them, and not take them for granted. I think that's one of the things for me about late Beethoven. It's not just that he went crazy like Coltrane, you know, in the late period. It's not just, it's partly that, right? It's partly that he wanted to do even, you know, and another thing that he does that's so important in that period is to reach back to the past, particularly Bach, and to take old things and to make them shockingly and desperately new. You know, like who would have written a? In other words, he's trying to distort or disturb the timeline.
The grosse fuga.
The grosse fuga, or my favorite example, the fugue subject poem. Like, what kind of fugue subject is that? And it's not over, and so there's this element of doing something, coming back to Bach, but also destroying him, and almost in a way, in some cases, like at the border of mocking the style that he's trying to recreate. Okay, I could go on for hours about that, but that's sort of some of the things that I think about. I think that's important, that element that you're willing to almost destroy the thing that you value the most in order to create something new. Yes.
Okay, well, for our next question, we travel. Take a moment to think about that one. Maybe that ties in with our world at the moment. Our next question brings in a musicologist from across the pond in Oxford, UK, and that's Margaret Bent, who I don't believe is up watching us at this moment, but she might be. She will actually ask a question that you touched upon throughout much of your comments this evening regarding the program. But I think she's looking for something else in her question that you can comment on. I'll read it and I'll let you have at it. What a thoughtful program, she writes. This lovely early work of Robert Schumann, written at about the age of 20, referring to Papillon, was premiered in 1831, as you spoke about, Jeremy, by Clara when she was an infant prodigy, just 12 years old. And then her later set of 3 romances when she was in her mid-30s, and the relationship with the Schumanns and their younger friend and protege Brahms at its most intense time. Brahms was born 2 years after Papillon, hard to believe, but you have not chosen Brahms from this period, when he was infatuated with Clara, and Schumann was on the brink of his final mental decline. Instead, you have chosen very late Brahms, composed shortly before his death in the 1890s. Could you say what you had in mind with this time spread, and then maybe also tie again in, as you spoke about, the Mazzoli piece and how it mediates it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, as I said, it's a chronology. I think the reason I chose late Brahms, I wanted to feel the sweep of the story. You know what I mean? And I wanted the bookend of youth and age, I guess. Papillon is pure youth, and middle age, and then as a kind of time travel thing, this, whatever Missy Mazzoli is, she Gen Z? I don't know what generation she is. This new commentary with this new tonal language. Yeah, because I think that those pieces speak to each other eloquently about a life. It's a one life spread between 3 people, I guess. Right? It was a certainly shared life that they had in many ways, and Brahms was still probably in love with Clara at whatever age he was, 63. I mean, we don't really know. He sent her all his pieces, right? And she would comment on them. It's weird that because she didn't compose that much after these romances, right? She's obviously got a tremendous gift. A lot of her very young pieces are somewhat, they're modeled. Like a lot of young composers' pieces are, they're modeled on other things. But these pieces, it feels like she's taken some from Robert or from Mendelssohn or Chopin, but she's refashioned it. I guess the other thing of the timeline is just this conversation between 3 of the great musical personalities of the 19th century. It's almost like 3 different facets of Romanticism too, right? Because Brahms is sort of classical structures, and Clara is maybe even a little bit more so towards the salon or the more quote unquote conventional, and Robert is pure fragments, right? And it's like all of them had slightly different tendencies. Yeah.
Well, that probably does not segue nicely into the next question. So I'm going to have to take a total left turn here. Our next question is from actor and author John Lithgow.
from Los Angeles. And this was the question that, as Jeremy and I discussed backstage, I have to read the performance note that John said should be included, which is that it should be asked in a lighthearted vein. So be forewarned. John writes that, Jeremy, you are one of those remarkable human beings who seems to be as beloved as they are talented and for whom everything seems to have come easy. Is there anything in your life that you regard as a failure or even a mild disappointment? Now, it sounds more like a therapy question if you ask me, but I think that John was asking this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but I guess I'll let you dive into that.
I'm guessing that he maybe had read some of my humorous blog pieces and saw that in fact I'm not the sunny, perfectly well-adjusted person that I seem to be. And to answer that question, I guess that why would I have confessed all this stuff about how my dark doubts and ways of dealing with music and then all the drama and it never seemed when I started doing my blogging some years ago, it just didn't seem possible to write in that kind of unalloyed positive PR kind of way about what I was doing. That the only way to write truthfully about being me or being a musician was to write about it in a sometimes tormented way. And I guess I've gotten that a little bit because with the torment is always mixed in some humor, and so I'm kind of laughing at my own torment is the gist of a lot of it, right? And I think that's an important part of the human experience, and I think it's something that I inherited maybe from my dad and certain books that I love to read, that even the deepest feeling, and I think this is true of Beethoven too, late Beethoven, even the deepest feeling needs to be able to laugh at some part of it, in some part of itself, at itself. So that's a, maybe none of you ever read any of those pieces. I think one of my favorite pieces that I ever wrote for the blog, and the one that I got the most wonderful compliment. I was sitting backstage with Garrison Keillor before one of the Prairie Home Companions, and he said, "I thought your piece on the concert, my debut, was really funny." I think, but I'll take a compliment from Garrison Keillor, on that. And that's a scene where my parents moved into assisted living, and they were pressuring me to play for their assisted living home on the piano, and the piano turned out not to really be a piano. It was kind of an electric thing that didn't really work properly. And I had virtually no pieces prepared, and I was all stressed about moving them and their health and all sorts of things. And hardly the moments. And I didn't have any clothes because I'd flown out there suddenly to help them, so I only had this one pair of shorts with a stain on it. And anyway, that's one of my favorite things, and it's pretty dark and very. And then they try to offer me money at the end of the gig, It's like, will you play for us again? And then I was like, I looked at them, and because they all seemed completely miserable, like they were all ready for dinner to start, and I was like, well. And he's like, "We'll pay you." And then I was like, "Oh God, I'm getting out of here. This is too humiliating." Anyway, that doesn't really answer John Lithgow's question in a way, but there are certain artists like I know who are able to create this persona around themselves, right? That is a little bit different from their real self, and I'm not one of those, sadly.
No, I would agree with that. We see you truly on stage. The last question comes from the Philadelphia-based composer, very highly acclaimed, Jennifer Higdon, our neighbor, just lives a few blocks away. As a performing artist, she asks, how do you think it is for other performing artists to commission and or perform music by living composers, and why?
I think it's incredibly important, and in a way, and I've done a bit of that, although not enough. And I'm now determined to get a bunch of pieces. I mean, I was determined during this pandemic to learn at least 3 recently written piano pieces, new pieces, which is harder as you get a little older, and it takes a little longer. And I've learned Missy's piece because I thought it was kind of an amazing piece and very difficult and interesting. And then it was a real challenge. And I learned a piece by Tanya Leon, which I also thought I would be able to learn more easily. I think it's a great service also to play pieces that have been premiered and commissioned and then are sitting a little bit unloved, because you have to create a tradition of them being heard, right? Sure. And you have to really inhabit them. And sometimes I like to choose pieces that are also that maybe I don't really like at first glance. Do you know what I mean? And then I
See
like
if they grow on you.
they grow. They often pieces that I thought, "Oh, I'm not sure, you know, but there's something in there, right? There's always something that fascinates me about it. Anyway, young composers need us now more desperately than ever. Like they had a hard time before. Now, I mean, it's a really hard existence. Um, and writing is hard. So what we do is recreation. That's very hard in its own way. But putting yourself out there, I think it's especially hard now because there's such a. It feels to me like there's so many stylistic possibilities to choose from. When you were Mozart, you just wrote in that basic style, more or less, or you got fired, right? But now you have options, and that's a problem. Anyway, you know, it gives me tremendous joy to inhabit a piece like that, and find for me the conviction in it, and I think we should all be doing much more of it than we have been.
I feel that over the years that you perform with us, you've actually managed in most of your recitals to include something that's new or newer, as you say. And so, no surprise that you spent some of your quarantine learning, shall we say, more recent compositions to inhabit your future programming.
It takes so long to learn them that you have to plan ahead. Yeah, that's the problem.
Well, one thing that the quarantine, this will tie into our last question that I had for you. One thing that the quarantine probably has proven is ample time to do a lot of things. And I was reading a review of yours on a book of Chopin by Annick Lafarge, and I noted at the end of it that you, in fact, might be putting together your own book based upon, drawing back to your essay that you wrote at the New Yorker several years ago, titled "Every Good Boy Does Fine." And I wondered, during this period of when a lot of us were facing an abyss in some ways, emotionally especially, and concerts had suddenly dried out, you had this kind of fascinating opportunity, although it must have been hard because the momentum of working towards something had suddenly kind of shifted in terms of your having concerts immediately coming up. But yet, you have a beautiful house in upstate New York, which allows you to kind of be one with nature and to kind of get away from it all. And I wondered if that environment and the fact that we suddenly had space to breathe, if that was a productive environment in terms of your writing, which if you don't know, Jeremy is a sensational writer, in addition to a wonderful, wonderful pianist. And then, but also just how that medium, how that time helped you, or how, if it did help you in terms of your writing and this book that I read about, and in general, your productivity.
Well, the first couple weeks I was in a bit of shock because I had a lot of fear in my travels that I had possibly given it to one or another dear friends who are of more advanced age, and so for 2 weeks there was nothing to be done. I just try to remain calm, and then when the danger passed, I did start on the book. I was like, if I'm not going to finish this book now, and I set it to it with a purpose, and it's amazing how long it takes to write a book, really. And especially because there's a lot of navel gazing. The book is basically about piano lessons. Like I had this New Yorker piece about my teacher, Shebuk in Bloomington, and my teacher when I was a 12-year-old kid in New Mexico. And then I fleshed it out with all the teachers that I met in Oberlin and in Juilliard and various other places and various music festivals. And I had a kind of amazing time over the years revisiting those teachers. And in the pandemic, I have to say, a lot of memories came flushing back to me in incredible detail. And especially the two Hungarian gurus that I had in Bloomington, Shebuk and Starker, but also some things that happened at Oberlin with this cello teacher. And therefore, I was able to recapture some of those scenes of the lessons in my mind and get them down. So I was productive, and I hope in the end result it's going to be a book that has some emotional wallop. Like this whole experience of receiving. I had so much as a kid, so much ambition in a way, so much drive to be a pianist. I had a certain amount of cluelessness, certain basic pieces of information were lacking. And between the drive and being able to listen to the teachers, be patient enough to listen, there was this constant war, and that gradually I got better, but it took a lot of, and it's kind of amazing to, and then I learned about each composer individually, So yes, I was productive. I feel guilty about that in a way, but it turned out to be, in a way, in that specific way, a blessing.
Fabulous.
And I just got it back from the editor, and
Oh, good.
so it may be out not too far.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for us, Jeremy, we lost out on Jeremy's all Bach recital from, which was actually during a tour of playing
The whole Waltemper Clavier, yeah.
Waltemper Clavier. And but I believe, if we're lucky, in March of 2022, Jeremy will return and potentially play. That's at least one option to come back and play that all Bach program again for us. So not only will you have that, but you'll have a book by then as well.
It will be then. It's the 300th anniversary of the composition of the Waltemper Clavier. It all works out very well.
Perfect. But in this time of uncertainty, it also may be that we call on Jeremy, who lives down the road in New York City, to come and play again. We are very thankful to the Philosophical Society for this space. To Bob, to Annie, we say thank you again. This piano is one that Jeremy likes, and all of our pianists like. We just purchased it with our mother organization, Marlboro. It's a beautiful German Hamburg Steinway, and it lives here in Ben Franklin Hall, which is what makes it so special. It doesn't have to travel and get banged up and out of tune and all that. So we thank the Philosophical Society for hosting the piano as well as us throughout every season. And in general, we say thank you for this night to Jeremy, to coming down in the midst of all this craziness. We hope that we see you all again very soon. Thank you so much, and take care, everyone. Thank you.